reselling tickets for incredibly high amounts. He also realized that some of the face value tickets cost more than he intended.
Leave it to Ticketmaster to do something so obscene. It made me so mad. You think like, oh wow, these are open. But if you go to the price, official platinum it says. Now what the is official platinum? It's $400. How much did we set these tickets to?
Let me look. It wasn't that.
No.
And for those wondering what official platinum means on Ticketmaster, it's a first-time sale ticket from a program that allows, quote, market-based pricing based on supply and demand. Or in other words, surge pricing. But the company is saying that the goal is to give fans fair and safe access to the tickets while enabling artists and other people involved in staging live events to price tickets closer to their true market value. But Ethan wasn't happy to see that face value tickets for his event were $400.
Who the are they to raise the price of my god tickets? That is pathetic. That is shameful.
It's so dumb.
Like, if you want to do the resale, that's lame. I hate it. But like, then you're raising the price on our first round tickets. What are you doing, man?
And going on to say that they plan on contacting Ticketmaster to disable the surge pricing and issue refunds for anyone who paid an inflated price if that's possible, with them noting that they set certain prices for a reason, arguing this doesn't actually help fans or give them a more fair chance at tickets, and saying it does nothing to help with scalping.
If you cared about scalping, you would not resell them on your website.
Exactly.
Morons.
Or because he was also annoyed to see that there were resale tickets listed and some for nearly $700. So it's worth noting that if you go to the ticket sale page now, while there are obviously still tons of resale tickets, it seems that there are no more platinum ones. Where all the blue circles, which mean first-time sales, they just say standard admission. And so the issue may have been resolved there, but the H3 podcast isn't the only show getting attention today for ticket sales. You also have things like the pre-sale for Billie Eilish's upcoming tour starting today. According to Live Nation's page for the tour, they're taking a different approach when it comes to secondhand tickets, saying that to give actual fans priority, the tour is using Ticketmaster's face value exchange, which allows fans who purchase tickets in the US and Canada who can no longer attend to resell their ticket at its original price. And to help that, the tour has requested that all tickets be mobile only and restricted to transfer. And this applying to all shows except ones in states where face value transfer cannot be mandated. And so that's an attempt to stop scalpers from jacking up the resale price on places like StubHub. But the thing is, Business Insider noted that even before the resale began, those websites already had ticket listings. And so you had Billie warning of potential scams. And even now that the sale has started in certain cities, there are listings on StubHub, so it's unclear if there are a bunch of scams or if people have found workarounds. But also, as of filming, the resale quite literally just began, so it's too early to see the real impact here. And then, horny movies are back. That has been the resounding headline and public reaction following last weekend's release of Challenger. There's got some experts thinking this shift could, how do I say it, potentially fix Hollywood's dry spell. And for those who haven't seen the movie, it stars Zendaya, it's about tennis, and just sexual tension spanning decades. I don't want to mess with spoilers, so just know that it's a love triangle about tennis play. And so far, the movie's been received very well by critics and audiences alike, topping the box office this weekend, and some outlets noting that young fans were the ones filling the seats. And while obviously Zendaya was the big pull here, with some noting that young people embracing an overtly sexual movie marks kind of a pivot, right? Because Gen Z, to some degree, has become known as this anti-sex generation, at least when it comes to film and TV, right? Like back in October, there was a study from UCLA that found that nearly half of people aged 13 to 24 found sex scenes unnecessary, and over half wanted to watch media focused on platonic relationships over romance. And all of this coming at a time when film has already kind of become relatively sexless. And with that, for example, you had the New York Times just doing a piece noting that in the 80s and 90s, overt sex in movies, that was the norm. And some of the most famous movies from those decades are known for their either explicit scenes or generally erotic themes. But that also changed in the 2000s when studios wanted to secure PG-13 ratings instead of R ratings to widen audience reach. Right, also allowed them to play into genres where they could sell merchandise, release censors in China. In fact, leading to one writer finding that films from the decade between 2010 and 2020, they had the least amount of overt sex scenes since the 1960s. But with the recent success of Challengers, you had places going, hey, maybe we're gonna see a big shift here. So there, it's also worth noting before you get the wrong idea about what Challengers is, as critics on NPR's Pop Culture Happy Hour explained, it is horny, but not porny. And outlets like Collider praising it for being a sexy film without a super in-your-face sex scene. But also, you know, sex is at the core of this story. Even the way they play tennis is horny. Which makes sense. It plays into the idea that the way people play sports one-on-one, or specifically tennis in this movie, that it is a relationship. Though while this conversation is happening, I do think that it is important to note, like, it is not a complete outlier. If anything, I think it shows that there is a trend, not that it is like starting a trend, but I mean, just in the last year, you've had Sydney Sweeney's Anyone But You, which has some spicy scenes. Saltburn is an unapologetically horny-ass movie. Also, I mean, Poor Things comes to mind. I mean, half of that movie is Emma Stone faking orgasm, right? And all of this is played out as we've also seen the rise of intimacy coordinators on sets, right? And all of this is you had Amy Pascal, one of the producers of Challengers, saying it absolutely feels like the pendulum has swung back toward filmmakers exploring adult relationships and sexuality in their projects. I welcome that. But as far as if we're going to see an overwhelmingly or a significant change in the industry, that remains to be seen. But in the meantime, I gotta pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts with all this? And then let's talk about the pro-Palestinian protests we've been seeing on college campuses, starting with Columbia University, because that's where it all began. Because, you know, around 2 weeks ago, the university's president was testifying before Congress, and hundreds of students began occupying the campus's south lawn, with them calling for a ceasefire in Gaza, demanding that the university divest from Israel, with eventually more than 100 of them being arrested. But also, despite being arrested as well as facing suspension, these protesters haven't backed down, and Columbia remains the epicenter of the movement. Where last night you had the university warning protesting students that they'd have until 2 p.m. to disperse, or they would be suspended, barred from campus, and unable to finish the semester. With that deadline, it came and passed. Most students said that they weren't going anywhere. And in fact, some became bolder, with dozens barricading themselves inside Hamilton Hall. Through all of this, you have others arguing that there's a real element of anti-Semitism among some of the protests. And with that, you know, some protesters have been caught on camera making anti-Semitic remarks or violent threats. But at the same time, you also have some people trying to brand any protests of Israel or any support for Palestine as categorically anti-Semitic. But then also with that, there's this issue of the official and the unofficial protests, right? With there being accusations of some people being there just to cause trouble. In Boston, for example, Northeastern University police cleared an encampment Saturday after a shout of "Kill the Jews" was heard. But this is a witness posted on social media that the shout actually came from a pro-Israel counter-protester. You also had school officials saying the demonstration had been infiltrated by professional organizers with no affiliation to Northeastern. And so at the end of the day, we've seen multiple clashing narratives and claims. But all of that also brings us to the police, right? Because in the past few days, we've seen them clashing with protesters more and more. At Emory University in Georgia a few days ago, Atlanta police made what some witnesses described as brutal arrests to clear an encampment there, reportedly deploying rubber bullets and tear gas. One officer captured on video repeatedly tasing a man already on the ground. And at a California university this morning, police arrested 25 protesters who had occupied a building on campus for more than a week. This morning, we also saw police officers moving into an encampment at UNC, arresting students who refused to disperse. And all in all, at least 900 protesters have been arrested at pro-Palestinian demonstrations on college campuses in the last 10 days, with those arrests taking place on more than 20 campuses across at least 16 states. But despite the crackdowns, these protests are only growing. And in fact, the movement has seemingly spurred life back into student-led pro-Palestinian movements across the world. Pro-Palestinian protesters gathering over the past week on university campuses in Australia, Canada, France, Italy, and the UK. Columbia-style encampments popping up in places like this university in Paris, where university administrators also called in police to break up the sit-in after some students refused to leave. Right, and so part of this is a lot of people wondering if the only thing police are doing is escalating the situation, right? Because many other schools have experienced protests without arrest, right? And with all these wild videos out there that we've seen, it may look like the country's campuses are devolving into battlegrounds. But notably, those have really just been the universities where the police have been sent in. And this is, you know, that's not the only option. At George Washington University, for example, police reportedly denied requests from the university to arrest protesters for trespassing, with them apparently concluding that taking enforcement action against a small group of peaceful protesters didn't align with the department's interests. And to that point, arrests made at the University of Texas at Austin may have been unlawful. Right, last week, 57 protesters were arrested by campus police, drawing praise from Texas Governor Greg Abbott. The local prosecutors actually dropped the charges due to what was described as deficiencies in the charging documents. Right, and so ultimately, the universities have these difficult, messy situations in their hands. But as we watch this situation evolve, I gotta take a second to pass the question off to you. What are your thoughts with everything that we're seeing here? And then, okay, so I'm a huge believer in voting with your dollars and backing companies that try to do more good than harm while providing a valuable service. And thanks to today's sponsor, I'm passively building an investment portfolio of those brands that I use daily. Because Griffin is an amazingly beautiful app that turns everyday spending into investing. From Spotify to Netflix to whoever, all of the places I spend with have become part of a daily investing practice for the long term. Whether you're a seasoned investor or you never bought a stock in your life or you're somewhere in between, Griffin lets you buy stock where you shop without lifting a finger. You buy a burrito from Chipotle, own Chipotle stock. It's fully customizable. You link the cards that you use most. You turn off companies you don't like. You set a weekly limit and you start with just $1 at a time. Deposits are aggregated weekly and transferred to your investment account. Griffin's adaptive investing is a first-of-its-kind technology making personalized investments based on your everyday journey. So just head to griffindefranco.com today and use code BILLD5 for $5 towards your new financially savvy habit around daily spending. No need to time the market or pick and choose stocks. Create the portfolio that uniquely aligns with your life at griffindefranco.com or scan the code on screen. And then we've got military families in Hawaii right now saying they feel betrayed by their government. And it all has to do with a 2021 incident where jet fuel leaked into the water system, serving 93,000 people on and around around the Pearl Harbor Naval Base on the island of Oahu. And that leak allegedly leading to thousands of people experiencing symptoms like stomach pain, vomiting, and diarrhea, as well as seizures, memory loss, anxiety, and asthma. And all of that leading to 17 relatives of U.S. military personnel suing the government over this. And notably, this is just the first of 3 lawsuits being brought against the government in relation to the incident, with all 3 cases involving a total of 7,500 other military family members, civilians, and service members affected by the leak. Right? And so basically, the outcome of this trial, which started yesterday, is going to determine the success of these other cases and the damages that can be awarded. And that's key here, because while I want to be clear, this trial just started and we don't really know how it's going to go, right now it's looking like damages is what it's going to come down to. Right? Not whether the government will be held liable, but how much they'll be made to pay for it. So let's get into the details of the case. Right? The fuel apparently leaked from tanks that date back to World War II, and notably, native Hawaiians and other residents had raised concerns over the possibility of leaks from these tanks threatening the water supply for a whole decade. And when Navy leadership finally became aware that a leak had occurred, they reportedly assured thousands of military families that the tap water was safe, with it being nearly 2 weeks before those families learned that jet fuel had made its way into their drinking water. And though the tap water was deemed safe again 3 months after the spill, some families were understandably still wary of trusting what the Navy said, with one of the families involved in this lawsuit telling the Associated Press that they spend more than $120 a month on jugs of bottled water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning, and that each night their 5 and 13-year-old kids carry cups of bottled water upstairs to their bedrooms to brush their teeth. And that, as this family and others suing the government say, they have continued to experience adverse health effects that they attribute to the leak. You know, with all this, the government has actually fully admitted their liability in the spill. Right? The Navy's own investigation described, quote, cascading failures, as well as poor training, supervision, and ineffective leadership being to blame for the incident. And on top of that, attorneys for the Department of Justice actually wrote in court documents in 2021 the United States, quote, breached its duty of care and that the plaintiffs suffered compensable injuries. But what those attorneys are also claiming is that no one was actually exposed to jet fuel at levels high enough to cause these types of ongoing health problems. Right? So they're saying, hey, it's our bad, but it's our bad that you got a stomach ache or you threw up the week of the spill, and claiming there's no way that these people are still experiencing health problems because of what happened in 2021. Right? And so that's what I mean about it coming down to damages. You know, because the compensation that you're going to get for a one-time illness, that's going to be a lot less than a chronic health issue resulting from the spill. But for now, we're going to have to wait to see how this plays out in the courts. And then, for the first time ever, a federal appeals court has ruled that state health insurance plans have to cover gender-affirming care. And this ruling, which came out of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, it stems from 2 different cases in North Carolina and West Virginia. The West Virginia case specifically centered around coverage under the state's Medicaid program, which allows for some treatments like hormones, but explicitly bans the state plan from covering gender-affirming surgery. And the North Carolina suit concerns the government-funded state employee insurance plan that provides medical coverage for more than 750,000 people. But it also bars all gender-affirming care under law that prohibits treatment or studies leading to or in connection with sex changes or modifications in related care. Now, the lawyers defending these laws have argued that they were just based on cost concerns, saying the denial of coverage was an effort to save taxpayer money and not rooted in bias, claiming that trans people could get the same health treatments as everyone else, but they were not entitled to have specialized care covered by insurance. But this is many major medical organizations and doctors say that gender-affirming care is medically necessary for trans folks. And in an 8-6 decision, the Fourth Circuit rejected the state's claims, ruling that the healthcare plans that ban coverage of medically necessary treatments for trans patients are discriminatory under federal law, notably upholding earlier decisions from lower courts that had rolled back those policies on similar grounds, with Judge Roger Gregory writing in the majority opinion that these state restrictions were obviously discriminatory based on both sex and gender, and adding, in this case, discriminating on the basis of diagnosis is discriminating on the basis of gender identity and sex, and saying that gender dysphoria is so intimately related to transgender status as to be virtually indistinguishable from it. And this decision is huge because the implications go way beyond just these 2 states, where there are similar cases being considered in courts all across the country, and experts saying that this is going to set an important precedent, especially because the court specifically ruled that West Virginia's policy violated the Affordable Care Act's anti-discrimination provision, which could impact other states' Medicaid programs. And according to the Movement Advancement Project, over half of all states lack laws that ban health insurance discrimination against trans people. And beyond that, 14 states explicitly exclude gender-affirming care from state employee insurance coverage, while 10 states ban Medicaid from covering medically necessary health care for all trans folks. But as far as how far-reaching this decision is going to be, that remains unclear. Right? West Virginia's Attorney General has already vowed to appeal the ruling to the Supreme Court, and there's a conservative majority there. And notably, the Supreme Court recently allowed Idaho to enforce its law banning gender-affirming care for minors. So ultimately, we're gonna have to wait to see what happens, because while this is big news, this is not the end of the story. And then, potentially game-changing medical news. There's a new blood test from a San Diego startup called Dionysus Digital Health that claims to be able to detect postpartum depression even before symptoms appear. And 1, this has been backed up by peer-reviewed scientific studies, and 2, the company is now partnering with government agencies to conduct clinical trials, with the aim here being to make this $250 test widely available and covered by insurance. And as far as how this test works, Dionysus says that it has identified a gene that connects moods to hormonal changes. Right, so this test will take a blood sample and then use machine learning to compare how genes are expressed by measuring them against other criteria. And because the company envisions this test being conducted in between a person's 2nd and 3rd trimesters, when combined with other information, information, it could help providers direct at-risk mothers to treatment or even preventative care. I mean, that would be absolutely massive because despite the fact that postpartum depression is one of the biggest causes of maternal death, both diagnosis and treatment have been, to put it in medical terms, complete shit. As many as 1 in 7 mothers experience postpartum depression, but proper screenings often don't happen, and one widely referenced study found that just 1 in 3 pregnant patients who exhibited signs of mental disorders actually received treatment. And even then, the treatment mostly consisted of reassurance from their providers, which is why this has been described as such a potential game changer. But, and this is a big but, the success of this product is heavily dependent on who can access it. Right? Experts say that only people with certain income levels can actually afford this kind of screening and preventative care. You know, disparities and inequalities that already exist in the healthcare system will just get worse. I mean, already research has shown that low-income women and women of color are less likely to be screened for postpartum depression than white mothers. And then there are also concerns that AI itself could further exacerbate racial and class-based biases and inequalities in the healthcare system. And then even beyond all that, it's important to remember this is only part of the equation, right? Screening is just a first step. You'd also need a system that opens up access to necessary care to treat postpartum depression. You know, otherwise, a screening's just letting you know there is a problem that you're just not going to be able to fix. But hey, we are looking at a glimmer of potential hope here. And then let's talk about Australia and men killing women. Right, it's been a couple weeks since the mass stabbing at a Sydney shopping mall that killed 6 and wounded 12, with nearly all of the victims being women. With the police saying the killer appeared to target women, and his father adding that he was frustrated because he couldn't get a girlfriend. Right, but that attack was just one particularly shocking one of a much deeper problem. Right, so far this year alone, 27 women have been killed in Australia from gender-based violence, according to the campaign group Destroy the Joint, meaning 1 woman is killed every 4 days on average, which if you adjust it for population size would be comparable to about 337 women getting killed in the US over the same period. So unsurprisingly, the fear and the anger simmering under the surface finally erupted into clear view over the weekend, with Australian women and men alike pouring onto the streets in the tens of thousands to protest for change, taking over cities from Sydney, Brisbane, and Melbourne to Adelaide, Newcastle, and the Gold Coast.
It's just gone on for too long. And like I say, we just need the politicians to step up.
This is an epidemic that requires the full resources of government at all levels.
My experiences, unfortunately, are not unique. Why is it that so many of us have to endure abuse?
With organizers demanding more funding for domestic violence services, an easier reporting process for victims, and rules